Hi there, I'm Katie Rose. I'm here today to talk to you about birth. First, a little bit about my background and why I wish to speak to you about this very important subject. I am a mother, I have 5 children. I'm also a doula, a childbirth support person. I've been practicing as a doula for almost 20 years now. I am a pregnancy yoga teacher trainer. So I've been training yoga teachers to practice and teach pregnancy yoga safely for a good couple of decades as well. And I'm really passionate about all things birth. My own births were truly magical and life-changing experiences. And I've had the experience personally myself of birthing both in hospital, having home births, and in birthing centres, and mostly natural, intervention free, very positive experiences. And so I feel like I'm speaking to you from a place of having some knowledge and also some experience of an area that can often be very contentious and bring up a lot of stuff for people. Now, the very first thing I want to say to you is my true belief about birth, the most important thing actually about birth is that it's a sovereign experience. What does that mean? It means that you get to choose as a pregnant woman how you birth your baby, where you birth your baby, who is with you in the room, in the space when you birth your baby. And these need to be genuine choices, not choices that you've been coerced into or that you feel pressured by, not choices made out of lack of information where you're struggling to really know what your options are and just kind of going with, what is most easily available or people pleasing and saying yes to things you don't really agree with, but truly choosing from a place of sovereign power, from a place of really feeling like you're in your own intuition and your own self-trust. And that might mean that you choose a home birth. It might mean that you choose a hospital birth. It might even mean that you choose a cesarean. The outcome is none of my business and it's not anyone else's business. It's only your business and your choice, and perhaps, of course, some conversation and agreement with your partner if that's appropriate too. So it's really interesting. I run a training, Birth Magic, which is a childbirth preparation training, and it really educates women in more depth than I'll be able to do today about childbirth and what your options are. And someone messaged me recently on Instagram and said, is it really just about home birth and kind of like, you're disguising it that it's about everything, but actually you've got a strong agenda for home birth. And I replied to this woman, I was like, no, truly. Sovereign to me means sovereign, meaning you decide. So maybe that is a home birth, but also maybe it's not. Maybe it's a hospital birth, or, maybe you'll choose some medical support or some interventions. My hope, however, is that I can educate you with an alternative narrative to what you might get in the mainstream. So through the hospital system, you are definitely going to get a narrative that is pro-intervention and highly medicalized. We know that over 90% of women in Australia at the moment have interventions throughout the birthing experience. Now, if you really stop and think about that, what that means is that what we're saying with that statistic is that 90% of women are not capable of birthing their babies without some kind of medical intervention. Now, personally, I do not believe that to be true. I just don't. If we look through history and if we look in the animal kingdom at other mammals, what we'll see is that the vast majority of female bodies are more than capable of birthing their babies without any kind of intervention at all, if the conditions are right. And we're going to talk about what those conditions are shortly. So, the huge majority, the majority percentage of women will be able to birth their babies with good support and no need for medical intervention. Now, every so often, in a small number of cases, things can happen where an intervention is required, and medical support in those situations can literally be life-saving. So I believe that there are times where a cesarean section or some kind of other intervention from a trained medical professional will be life-saving and is necessary. And in those moments, we should be incredibly grateful for the support that we're given and for the access to medical care that we have. However, again, in my opinion, the system has gone bananas. It's gone completely in the opposite direction, where we come at birth from the premise that we're not going to be capable, that our bodies will fail us, and that we need interventions at every single step of the journey. And in my opinion, this is upside down thinking. We need to come at birth from the perspective that all will be well unless there are strong indicators otherwise. So my personal position is not anti mainstream medical institution. It's certainly not anti-intervention if intervention is required and necessary, but it is definitely pro-natural and pro the belief that women are capable of birthing their babies without intervention, and without need for medical interference in most cases. And I really believe that for 90% of the women watching this, even more, 95% of you, that is the truth and that will be possible. And in those rare occasions where it's not, thank goodness that medical support is available. So today I'm going to share with you 5 tips around birth. And there's so much more I can say about this. And of course, there's nuance and detail that I won't have time to go into today. As I mentioned before, my childbirth education program, Birth Magic, is a much deeper dive into all of these areas and the whole discussion around birth and many of the things I'm going to mention today in more detail. So if you want to go deeper with me, there's absolutely an opportunity to do that. It's an online program, so you can watch it from anywhere in the world, and it will give you a really robust, thorough education from the perspective I've already shared into childbirth education. But for now, let me share with you 5 tips that I've just compiled myself. No chat GPT, no interference or ideas for anyone else. I sat down and I thought to myself, of all the knowledge I've got, of all the trainings I've done, which have been many over the years, of all the podcasts I've listened to, the books I've read, the births I've attended, which are dozens now, my own births, if I had 5 things I could tell a woman in a short period of time about birth, what would they be? Here we go, let's dive in. The first one is, bodies are complicated, but birth is not. So if you really want to learn about the human body in sublime detail, in its intricate detail, you're going to do like maybe a medical degree, you're going to become a doctor, or maybe you'll become a physio, or perhaps you'll become a subtle anatomy expert and you'll learn about the way that energy works in our bodies. And you'll come to understand, no matter what modality, maybe you'll study naturopathy, that the human body is quite complex. It's a masterpiece of design. And when we really want to understand how your liver works, how the functionality of breathing works, how your nervous system works, how your brain works, which we still don't really know very much about. It's a lot of study, it's a lot of detail, and it's a lot of complexity. So on the one hand, it's a mistake, I believe, for us to dismiss that complexity and say, I'm just going to keep it natural and I don't need to know anything about, the medical world, or any detailed sort of anatomy and physiology or anything like that, because there are times where that knowledge is very, very important, and when we turn to experts who've studied in enormous detail to support us. If you need to perform a cesarean section as a life-saving measure, because, for example, we've got placenta previa, which is where the placenta covers the exit point for the baby, covers the cervix. That's a life-saving surgery, and it's something I would not undertake as a layperson. I would rely on a highly qualified surgeon who has an intricate knowledge of the anatomy of the human body to do that surgery for me. However, when we come to the birth space, for most women, all of that complex knowledge and understanding is not necessary, because your body is magic and it knows what to do. So whilst your human form is a little bit complicated, let's be honest, the process of birthing for most women is not. Actually, what we need to do is get out of our own way and stop overthinking. We don't birth from our minds. We do not birth from a place of mental consideration. This is not how mammals, human beings, successfully birth their babies. We birth when we're able to relax, when the nervous system feels safe, and when we let the body do what it naturally and instinctively wants to do. So when we can get out of our own way and stop making it so complicated and instead set up the conditions so that we feel safe and supported and ready, then birth will, in the vast majority of cases, unfold in the most exquisite, beautiful way without too much effort from us. Like many other bodily functions, if you need to have a bowel movement, you want to be in privacy, you want to be in a bathroom, you want to know that you're going to be able to clean your body afterwards. And then you can sit on the toilet and do a poop without having to think about it too much. Similarly, with birth, when we set up the right conditions, we're able to birth our babies without having to really think about it too much. In fact, I heard one childbirth educator recently say, we can birth our babies with as much ease as we conceived them if we can relax in the same way. So for most of us, the experience of conceiving our babies is, a joyful and intimate one. And so too can the birth process. It can be the same. Our bodies know what to do. Now, again, as I've mentioned already, in some rare occasions, we're going to need help. We're going to need some intervention and some support. And maybe our bodies do get a little bit stuck or have some problems, in which case that support is available. And in my Birth Magic training, we talk a lot more about what those interventions and what that support might look like. But here I want to speak about the 95% of us that won't need those interventions if we're able to set up the correct conditions for birthing. So yes, our bodies are a little bit complicated, but no, birthing doesn't have to be. And in the vast majority of cases, we can keep it really, really simple. Now, an extension from that, which is the second point I want to make today, is this idea of go with the flow. So, I live in Australia, and the classic kind of Australian sentiment around many things is the kind of she'll be right, mate. I'll just see what's going to happen on the day. Go with the flow mentality. And that's a really beautiful way to live. However, because of the over industrialization and medicalization of our birthing system, this go with the flow attitude really doesn't work for women that want to have as fewer interventions or as natural a birth as possible. Because if you go with the flow, you will get sucked into the vortex of the medical industrial complex, and you will most likely, as I've already mentioned, end up with a host of interventions and potentially outcomes that you really didn't want. Now, of course, they'll be consensual, but we can't take away the element of coercion that happens in hospitals and in medical systems. So often, time and time again, interventions, procedures are presented as non-optional and non-negotiable, when in fact, in birth, when it comes to your body, everything is negotiable and everything is optional. And if there's only one thing that you get out of this webinar today, like one golden nugget that you take away, let it be that. Everything is optional. Everything is negotiable. That's sovereign birth. This is your body. You get to choose. I can't tell you how many times women, intelligent, educated, spiritually connected women whom I admire and respect, have lost their power in the face of medical pressure and institutions, that have an agenda. And I hear women say to me again and again, in my role as a pregnancy yoga teacher, as a friend, as a doula, I didn't know I could say no to that. I didn't know I had a choice. And that's because often these institutions frame it as it's not a choice and this is just what we do. We don't need to sign up for that. We can actually ask a lot of questions and we can make decisions every step of the way that feel aligned with our own sense of self-trust and our own intuition. So go with the flow is a bad paradigm, in my opinion, for entering into a birth situation. I'm going to have my baby, I'll turn up to the hospital and I'll just see what happens on the day. Most likely you'll end up with a highly medicalized, honestly, quite traumatic experience, unless you go in with some strong advocacy, a birth plan, and some clarity around the type of outcomes and the type of birth that you want to have. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the Birth Magic training is this idea of the birth plan, which is a document that outlines what your wishes are in different scenarios and for your birth experience. Because when you're actually in labor, you will not be your own best advocate. One thing to remember is that labor is an altered state, and it should be an altered state. You're meant to go into a different mentality, a different mindset, a different zone, almost like an altered state of reality. That is the state in which we birth our babies, similar to the state of orgasm in which we might, hopefully, if we're lucky, conceive our babies. And so it's in this altered state of consciousness that we are best equipped to truly surrender the nervous system, soften the pelvic floor, and allow our babies to be born. And then after that, all the beautiful endorphins come in, all the cocktails of hormones work in our favor, and we create beautiful connection with our babies, and we feel amazing, actually. However, when that is interfered with and we don't get to go into that altered state of consciousness, then we can start to experience pain and overwhelm and fear in a very different way. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But coming back to my point, birth is an altered state of consciousness. It's not a place in which we're good for advocating, answering questions, or making decisions. So what we do is we create a document where we've made those decisions beforehand, and we have advocates who can help us to implement them when we're in an altered state of consciousness. So that might be your partner, it might be your doula, it might be your midwife. It's probably not going to be the healthcare providers that happen to be on duty in the hospital at the time that you rock up to give birth, because those medical professionals are trained to follow a particular set of protocols based on statistics, based on intervention, and often not really based on giving autonomous sovereign choice to the woman that they're in service to. So we come in equipped, we come in with a support team, we come in with a plan, and that way there's a freedom to drop into this altered state of consciousness, knowing that we're safe to do so, and knowing that our support team and our birth plan has our back. So we don't have to be in that analytical decision-making advocacy frame of mind. So we're not going to go with the flow. Instead, we're going to come in well prepared and supported. Next point, let me talk a little bit about pain. So this is a really interesting one. Most of us in our culture are not used to experiencing lots of pain because we have really good medical ways of managing pain so that we don't have to deal with it. And many of us are really scared of pain. I remember when I had my first child, one of the things that worried me the most is, will it be so painful that I won't be able to cope? Now, one of the things I want to share with you, another kind of golden nugget for today, is that if you are able to drop into relaxation between contractions, labor will be entirely manageable for you. Where women get derailed in birth is when they get so anxious, so tense, so scared, and so tight in the breath and the body that they are no longer able to clearly experience the wave of contraction, which I'm going to call pain, followed by the break between. And for the most of labor, for the largest percentage of labor, the breaks between discomfort, pain, contraction will be longer than the contraction itself. So I knew this theory in my first birth with my first child, and I really had to work hard to remember it in my body. A contraction would come, it would feel really intense. And then when the contraction started to finish, there would be this temptation in my mind to start anticipating the next one and going into tension and shutdown and fear. And I would also be wondering how much worse they were going to get and whether I could cope. And again, I would contract. But I would coach myself because I had this information and I had prepared. It's okay. Let's not worry about the next contraction. Breathe, soften, surrender, take this sacred pause, and the next contraction, the next wave will come when it comes. But right now, there is no pain. There is a softening, and there is an ability to be in this moment in relative ease and comfort. And that technique worked for me really well in my first birth, but I had to work a little bit for it to really regulate and manage myself. By the time I got to my second birth, a couple of years later, which was a home birth, the breaks between contractions, I could just drop straight into complete relaxation. So I'd have a strong surge, a strong contraction. I would experience pain, but then very quickly it would subside and I would be able to chat with my midwife, chat with my husband, chat with my little 2-year-old who was also there, really feel quite calibrated and quite okay. And then the next surge would come and I would deal with it. And in between, those breaks would happen. And they were very marked and very made the whole thing actually very manageable and very joyful. I had such a great birth. By the time I got to baby number 3, honestly, it just felt, I'm not going to say pain free, but very manageable and very easy to work through because I knew how to dance with the rhythm of contractions in my body. Again, I got out of my own way and I just let my body do what it needed to do. Now, for many of you, whether you're coming into a first birth, perhaps you're birthing a second or third time after having had traumatic births, this ability to drop into nervous system rest, no anxiety, safety, feeling relaxed between contractions is going to be the key to being able to have a positive birth experience and manage pain. So we want to really put some tools into place so that you know how to soften your pelvic floor, how to utilize your exhale, so that you know how to soften and relax between contractions and make a natural birth sustainable, regulated, to have a feeling of safety and manageability. Like, yes, I can do this. This is possible. This is available for me. So there are many very simple techniques for regulating pain in this way. Again, we go into them in more detail in the Birth Magic training. But even if you don't do that training with me, just know that by dropping into the space between contractions and not allowing anxiety and pain to elevate and to become just an unendurable sort of tunnel of pain, because birth is not like that. It works in waves. Then we can really regulate and manage the experience of birthing our babies. It's an incredible tool. Next tip, information over intervention. So I've spoken about the very high levels of intervention that are happening in our birthing culture here in Australia and actually all over the Western world. Which, that's a whole topic in and of itself. But one thing I wanted to flag here as one of my 5 top tips is the idea that information can be extremely valuable. So what I notice a lot in the birthing world is polarity. I notice we've got the medical institutions on this side, and we've got the free birthing, natural birthing, wild pregnancy institutions on this side. And they tend to be quite polarized and in sort of a lot of disagreement with one another. I want to advocate for a truly middle ground where we can utilize information in order to inform our decision making. So, for example, we might have an ultrasound and we might find out something about our unborn baby or our own bodies in pregnancy that provides useful information that we then use as part of doing further research and making decisions about how we want to birth and what kind of outcomes we're looking for. We might have some different testings done in order to gather or garner more information. We might not even undergo testing, but go through different communication, different conversations. We might seek the advice of different experts. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're coming towards the end of your pregnancy and your baby is breech. That means your baby is kind of upside down and wants to come out either feet first or bottom first rather than head first. Now, this is not ideal. If you are in a medical institutional kind of paradigm, there's going to be all of a sudden a whole bunch of interventions recommended, including most likely a cesarean section. Now, the information that you have at this point is my baby is breech, my baby is presenting upside down. The choice that that information then gives you opens up a whole doorway to finding out more information in order to make decisions around whether or not you want interventions. One example might be there's a beautiful body of work called Spinning Babies, very special, practical body of work that describes ways in which we can get breech babies to spin around and be ready to come out head first. We might also look at some research and look at the timelines around how babies are actually able to move themselves into position as late as 39, even into 40 weeks of pregnancy. A baby can decide, actually, you know what, I'm going to turn around now. And, the narrative that the mainstream medical scenarios will give us is from about 36 weeks, if your baby's upside down, that's it, you're having a breech birth. Well, actually, this isn't true. Babies can turn quite late in the day. So that's another piece of information that might be really useful to know. We might also learn about acupuncture and how that has had some incredible results in working with breech babies. And so in this way, yes, we've got the information, the baby is breech, but then we're able to use that information to research and to make our own decisions around what interventions we then want to take. Another good example, and it's just, there's so many examples I could use, but let's talk about vitamin K. In Australia, newborn babies immediately at birth are given a vitamin K injection. Now, we might wish to garner some more information about why a newborn baby is given a vitamin K injection. Is my baby specifically at risk? Are there any alternatives? The answer is yes, there are. The baby can be given the vitamin K orally rather than through injection, as an example. And through all this information, and then, we can look at statistics like what's the likelihood that my baby, especially if my baby was born without intervention and without any risk of internal bruising, what's the likelihood that my baby will need vitamin K, which is a substance that helps to avoid hemorrhaging. It actually helps blood to clot. Babies are low in vitamin K, but we've got to ask ourselves the question, what's the likelihood that my baby is going to experience a hemorrhage in the first couple of weeks of his or her life? When we garner this information and we start asking questions, we can then begin to make decisions about interventions. My own personal decision around vitamin K with all my babies was it's not going to be necessary. The risk of my baby having an internal hemorrhage is so incredibly low that I would prefer not to give an injection or give an intervention, given I now have information that the risk is very low. Had one of my babies been born by forceps or ventouse or any other type of birth where there is a little bit more risk of hemorrhaging because the baby's had a bit of a harder time in being born, perhaps I would have chosen to give the vitamin K, and maybe I would have chosen to give it orally rather than through injection because that's a slightly more gentle way of administering it. The more information that we have, the more empowered we are to make conscious choices. Now, the medical institutions and the systems are not in the business of giving us vast amounts of information. They're in a hurry. We're one of millions, and they're much more likely just to say, this is what we do, this is what we're going to do, this is protocol based on statistics. And you get pushed into the sausage machine and you kind of come out the other end of it, often feeling quite traumatized and wondering what on earth has just happened. Instead, we can utilize information to then do our own investigations and make conscious, sovereign decisions about what interventions we're choosing. We're self-trusting, we're trusting our intuition, we're trusting the information that we're gleaning, we're choosing to undergo. My last point brings me full circle, my fifth tip, which is the biggest gift you can give yourself in birth, in childbirth, and in pregnancy, and in parenting, because remember, childbirth is just the precursor to becoming a mother, is the ability to regulate your own nervous system and to regulate your own breath. I spoke at the beginning of this webinar about how our bodies are designed to give birth and know what to do if we can get out of our own way. The best ways that we can do that is a support team that leaves us feeling safe, or a support team that supports us in feeling safe, an environment in which we feel safe. And if that happens to be a hospital, there are different ways in which we can make the hospital space feel cozy, feel nurturing, feel safe. And the feeling, so team, environment, and safety in our own bodies, in our own nervous systems. And that is something we can learn. Now, you are unlikely to learn how to regulate your nervous system or how to regulate your breath when in labor. We need to do a bit of practice beforehand. And this is where yoga is such a gift. The practices of yoga teach us nervous system regulation, breath regulation, and the experience of being comfortable and at ease in our own bodies, the ability to regulate when things get stressful. And the more you have that tool, the easier birthing is going to be for you, but not just birthing, motherhood. Trust me, motherhood is going to bring up a whole bunch of stuff for you. It is a rite of passage like no other. filled with some of the biggest joys you will ever experience, and also some of the biggest challenges that you'll ever experience too. How do we get through those? We get through them by coming back to center, coming back to breath, and the ability to let go, to soften and let go, to exhale. The more we practice this through yoga asana, through pranayama, through breathing techniques, and through the ability to work with our own minds and to regulate our own mental states, the more prepared for labor that we will be, and the more prepared for parenting that we will be. So there are many different ways to do this. Yoga isn't the only one. There are definitely other somatic practices and body-based practices that will prepare you really beautifully for birth. But I highly recommend that you undergo practice of some kind of technique that will help you release, let go, soften, regulate nervous system, regulate breath in labor, and then beyond in your life as a mother. And I would caveat that by going back to this point that we need to keep it really simple. Some techniques, I was listening to a birthing webinar yesterday because that's what I like to do in my spare time. I was on a long drive with my daughter and I was listening to a podcast in which the practitioner who was describing best breath practices for labor with really good intention and with a lot of knowledge. She's a highly educated professional. She's a physiotherapist and a somatic healer, was describing a breathing technique for labor that I know intellectually and technically works. She was talking about release of diaphragm. She was talking about the intercostal muscles between the ribs, pelvic floor, what we're doing with our tongue, jaw, and mouth, and breathing through the nose. And she was teaching a technique in which all these different elements needed to be in synchronicity for optimum birthing experience. And I knew intellectually everything she was teaching was spot on. It was very accurate and somewhat helpful. The reality is, when we're actually in birth, there is no way we're going to be able to intellectually calibrate all those different parts of the body and have them do what we need them to do. Our best friend, our best resource is the ability to, what in Sanskrit we call swaha, let go and let God, release, hand it over, soften, exhale, let your body do what it needs to do. Let the divine energy support you in doing that. Trust, surrender. These are the tools for birthing, not complicated cerebral techniques that are going to leave us feeling like, am I doing it right? Like overwhelmed, confused. All we need to do is get out of our own way, to practice beforehand, softening and surrendering mentally, emotionally, physically, and energetically, so that when we get into the birth space and we get into mothering, we're in that place of soft surrender. The divine feminine is there to support us, and we can birth our babies with ease and grace. I really hope this session has been helpful. I hope I've been able to share with you some things that will be useful to you in your birthing journey. Please do reach out if you have any questions, and I would absolutely love for you to join me inside Birth Magic, where we go through everything I've mentioned today in much more intricate detail, and I teach you the tools that are going to serve you on this journey of birthing your babies with grace, joy, and ease.